RPGs have been around for a long time, and there are tons of different titles to choose from. Obviously, each game has its own take on the formula, with some sticking rigidly to classic mechanics while others take something of a more liberal or experimental approach. But really, with so many games and so many different iterations out there, is there anything new to be experienced in the realm of the role-playing genre? I think the answer to this question is yes and no. On one hand, role-playing games have to incorporate certain staples that fans expect or even demand, but on the other, changing up narratives, art styles, exploration options, and dozens of other variables can often lead to some very inspired experiences for gamers to enjoy. One such upcoming contender in the RPG space is Sabotage Studio's Sea of Stars. It's an RPG that supposedly wants to modernize the classic formula while simultaneously offering up some nostalgia and fun. In principle, this sounds easy enough, but if you think about it, this end goal is a fairly ambitious one. I like to think about it along these lines. Whenever you decide to listen to a new piece of music or start playing a new game, you naturally have some expectations that you'd like fulfilled. This isn't really a conscious process, but of course when you invest time or money into anything, you want to make sure that you aren't wasting your time or getting a bum deal. In this sense, anything someone creates has to carefully balance between the old and familiar and the novel and unanticipated. In other words, when you play an RPG, you expect it to be somewhat like or possibly even almost identical to previous RPGs you've played, but then you also don't want it to be too similar, otherwise your adventure will feel boring and predictable, and that's just no fun at all. This dichotomy is faced by virtually every developer, musician, artist, or YouTube content creator out there, and those who can walk along the knife's edge without shedding a single drop of blood are the cream of the crop, the ones that stand tall and reign supreme over their peers. However, this is a little reductive, and there's another factor to take into account here: making stuff better. There's no doubt that classic RPGs are amazing, even perfect in their own right, but that doesn't mean they were perfect in every single respect. A lot of the problem comes down to the simple fact that the technology at the time effectively limited developers from creating games that were more realistic, smoother, and overall just better. You can obviously argue that the limitations make the games what they are, which is inevitably true, but that doesn't mean that once technology progresses and audience expectations shift that you shouldn't keep up with it. So perhaps it's better to view Sea of Stars as something that doesn't completely turn the RPG genre on its head, but rather refines it so that it feels like a mostly seamless experience. But before we go any further, what is this game even about? Sea of Stars is actually a prequel to 2018's The Messenger, but is set thousands of years before the events of its predecessor. The story centers around two children of the solstice, Valerie, the moon girl, and Zale, the sun boy. Along with their friend Gal, who is both a warrior and a cook, this pair will have to combine their powers in order to perform what's known as eclipse magic to defeat the horrible monsters that have been brought to life by an evil alchemist known as the Fleshmancer. Sea of Stars draws a lot of inspiration from titles such as Illusion of Gaia, Breath of Fire, and Chrono Trigger, which is undeniably great source material. So now the next question is how the game seeks to modernize, and I guess you can read that as improve, the classic RPG experience. Well, according to Sabotage Studio, the game won't feature any random encounters or require you to grind for hours in order to level up and progress. A huge issue gamers have with many RPGs, as well as games with RPG elements, is that they have to spend a lot of time doing monotonous tasks in order to level up their characters and beat bosses. Not only can this be extremely frustrating, but it often feels gimmicky and, for the most part, unrewarding. Now, I know many of you enjoy the grind, and all power to you, so given what I've just said, you might be thinking that Sea of Stars isn't going to be your bag. I actually wouldn't go as far as to say that, and offer up this simple reason. Just because you won't be grinding or fighting random NPCs doesn't mean that there isn't a challenge or that you won't have to put the work in. I think what Sabotage Studio have managed to cleverly pull off here is a system whereby all of your actions feel meaningful and directed instead of arbitrary and repetitive. In short, you will need to take on challenges and use strategy and cunning to win, but each new fight should be fresh and fun, ultimately leading to a more engaging gaming experience and one where the core narrative is kept firmly in focus. Don't tell me that doesn't sound good to you. Hopefully you're now more on board with Sea of Stars and have a better understanding of the developer's underlying philosophy. I don't think it's anything mind-blowing, but it definitely feels smart and sensible to me. On top of the whole no grinding thing, Sea of Stars also shouldn't have any annoying transitions or breaks between different battlefields, meaning that you'll be able to spend more time in-game enjoying yourself. I would be very surprised if anybody objects to this aspect, since anything that detracts from your immersion is something I would imagine developers would want to avoid in as much as possible. But hey, maybe you think transitions are a nice way to break up the flow. Either way, Sea of Stars aims to bring a more seamless experience to the table, so make of that what you will. Another part of classic RPGs that I'm sure many gamers don't really enjoy is the fact that traversal is rigidly bound to a grid, making moving from place to place feel a little robotic and stiff. I guess you could argue that forms part of the genre's charm, and while I wouldn't say that Sea of Stars is devoid of this, it certainly takes a much more dynamic approach when it comes to animations and movement. In this way, you'll find that the game often feels more like a platformer when moving around. Sea of Stars isn't just walking from place to place. There's swimming, climbing, jumping, vaulting, and even the ability to hoist yourself up from ledges, which should make the whole experience experience feel that much more immersive. It's also not like you'll be viewing the game from the same perspective at all times, which I think enhances the game's narrative by creating different visual spaces that help propel the story. This is a really nice touch and something that I think RPG fans of all tastes will really appreciate. Okay, so now on to the part that I'm sure many of you watching are really wondering about, and that's the combat. Sea of Stars features the classic turn-based encounters you're used to, but obviously being a Sabotage Studio production, the game has a few mechanics that enhance battles and allow you to feel a little more personally involved in the process. For example, by pushing the action button at the same time as an animation, you'll amplify your attack damage and also have any incoming damage dealt to you reduced. This is actually quite similar to the mechanics seen in WrestleQuest, a wrestling RPG that we covered in our previous video. I personally like the whole timed hit mechanic because it adds another layer to the gameplay and allows players to develop their own skills in hand-eye coordination. So while there's still some degree of chance, this should make combat feel more hands-on. Another interesting aspect with regard to Sea of Stars combat is multi-character combos, which are typically made up of two different skills. In order to use combos, you'll need to earn combo points, otherwise known as CP. You'll gain CP whenever party members or enemies take turns, but you'll find you earn the most when you break spell locks. In essence, combo attacks where Valerie and Zale combine their powers will cause attacks to inflict both solar and lunar damage to enemies. Note that a maximum of 3 CP can be available at any time and that all CP is lost once a battle is over. Combos play an integral part in combat and allow you to do far more damage when attacking enemies, so you absolutely do not want to ignore this. Sea of Stars encourages you to get creative with your approach and use teamwork to get through encounters, so the more you use your party's individual skills as well as their combined abilities, the better. Sea of Stars also features the option to sneak attack enemies. In order to pull this off, you'll need to creep up on a target from behind. Sneak attacks deal a tiny bit of damage and also generate 1 live mana that you'll be able to use during combat. Bear in mind that enemies can also carry out sneak attacks, so don't get caught completely off guard in the event that this actually happens. Other interesting aspects of Sea of Stars' combat system include spell locks, where any spells that are cast come with 1 or more locks. Breaking a spell lock reduces the potency of a spell, while breaking all locks negates it completely. Then there are boosts, which require live mana. A party member can convert any live mana they earn into a boost charge that will enhance whatever their next action is. Using boost charges doesn't take up a turn, so you can consume a boost charge and then act immediately if so desired. A single action can use up to a maximum of 3 boost charges at once. Beyond this, Sea of Stars looks absolutely beautiful because of the dynamic lighting it employs to really make those sprites come to life. I don't think I'll ever get tired of pixel art games, and Sea of Stars may well be one of the smoothest and most beautiful looking ones out there. Oh yeah, and it's also not all about combat. From sailing and cooking to fishing and listening to music at taverns, Sea of Stars offers up a world where you're free to change up the pace and chill out between missions and side quests. Given the great success of The Messenger and just how polished and smooth this game looks, Sea of Stars is one RPG that promises a breath of fresh air in a genre where just about everything has been done to death. Sea of Stars is out on August 29th and will be available on PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Switch, and PC. So that's where our journey ends for today, friends. What are your thoughts on Sea of Stars? Do you like all these additions and improvements, or are the devs at Sabotage Studio just missing the point? Let us know in the comments. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for daily gaming, VR, and tech content. From me and the crew here at Metasquad, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Later!